for you to get a feel for what the needles feel like in your hand, and to start getting a little comfortable with dealing with it. Now I'm going to switch my camera so that you can see my hands. And there we go. So the first thing to do is, everybody got their needles and their wool. The first thing to do is to cast on. There's several different ways to cast on. I use the 2-needle method to cast on, just because that's what I'm comfortable with. So the first thing you have to do is to make a slip knot. So what you do is you take your wool in your right hand with the tail hanging down, grab it with the 2 fingers of your left hand, wrap it around the 2 fingers once, and then throw the leading edge over. Okay. I think I was holding it too high there. I'm going to do that again. So you wrap the wool lightly around your 2 fingers of your left hand and throw the leading edge over. You go through with your needle in your right hand, you go under, and then you just scoop that wool that you threw over, and voila, you've got a slip knot. And the reason why you want a slip knot is if you ever have to take it out, or you've made a mistake and you want to start over again, the knot is gone. So again, I'm going to do it one more time. Over the 2 fingers, make kind of an X there. Go underneath, and then scoop out. Now, we don't want to spend a lot of time on that. That's something you can practice on your own. So if anybody isn't able to make the slip knot, then just tie it. Just make a regular knot, and because that's your starting stitch there. That's your first stitch, knitting stitch, is that slip knot. So just make a knot, tie it on, and get going. So now we're going to cast on. So the working needle where you're going to create all the stitches is in your left hand. And then you're going to put on your right, from your right needle, you're going to pass it through. I don't know if everybody can see, you're passing it through the loop underneath. You're going to wrap the wool around the needle that's on the bottom. And then you do another scoop, the way I did to make the slip knot. You pull that wool through, make a great big loop, and then just pull it gently through. Now I have 2 needles, 2 stitches. I'm going to do it again. You're going to put the right-handed needle through the bottom of that top loop. You're going to wrap the wool around the back of the right-hand needle. Pull it down, and you're going to just pull that wool through. You see? Now you're just making a nice big loop. And you put that loop right over top. And you just keep going until you get as many stitches as you want. For the purposes of this class, what we'll do is we'll just do 10, or as many as you can make happen, because then I want to show you how to knit the knit stitch, which is very similar to this. So again, through the top to the back, wrap the wool around the back of your right-hand needle, scoop that wool up, and put it over the needle. And I'll do it again. I'm going to do 10 of these around the back, kind of lever the right-hand needle, So you can pull the wool out, make a big loop, and then you just kind of pull it so you've got a soft, gentle tension. The mistake that most beginner knitters make is because you're kind of stressed and you're working really hard and you're thinking really hard, is it becomes very tight. And that's not what you want, but you don't want it too loose either. So the reason, what you do when you start knitting, the only project you should think of doing is a scarf, because scarves are really forgiving. And if you give it to someone as a gift, they're just going to be delighted to have something hand knit. So if it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter. But that, it does what is called setting your tension. And once your tension is set, it's generally set for life. Like you'll probably knit at the same tension all the time, unless you consciously try and change it. And so what you want, when I first knit, I mean, for the first couple of projects, my tension was so tight that I could barely move the wool along the needle. But I gradually, as I got more confident, started loosening it up. So put the right needle through from the front to the back, wrap the wool around the back, and pull it through. Make a nice big fat loop. There you go. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm going to do 2 more. Round the back, pull it through, and 1 more. Go round the back, pull it through. So now I have 10 stitches. Now, there's only 2 stitches in knitting. There's knit, and then there's purl. And purl is the mirror image of knit. So that's what allows you to, if you're knitting a sweater and you want a nice smooth surface, then your rows would be knit 1 row, and then the next row you would purl, so that you have a nice smooth surface on one side, and that's usually the one that's facing out. And that is called, I always get mixed up, a stockinette stitch or a stocking stitch. So knit 1 row, purl 1 row is stocking stitch. Garter stitch is what we're going to do today, because what we're going to do now is we're going to do an actual knit, and we're going to knit every row. So garter stitch is what you would use to make a scarf, or something where you want the front to be exactly the same as the back. So you don't have that one smooth side and then the rough side with the purl at the back. You have, it all looks the same. So again, it's the same thing. I got to keep my hands out of the way, which isn't natural for me. I usually work like this, but I got to try and keep my hands out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. So it might look a little inelegant, but that's okay. So right hand needle through the front to the back. Oh, wrap the wool around the back. Do your scoop, but instead of pulling it over the top, which we've been doing to cast on, you actually just slide it on to the next needle, to the right hand needle. So now that is knitting. So from front to back, wool around the back, scoop that wool through, and slide the whole thing right off. Can you see it? Mm-hmm. Forrest, are we going to turn you into a knitter? You're looking pretty interested. So now you've got stitches on both sides. So your goal is to get to the end of the left needle and have all the stitches on your right hand needle. But to have, you're increasing your work all the time. So again, through the front of the next stitch, wrap the wool around the back, scoop it through, and slide it off. And I've got a neat little poem. My sister found it for me one year. It's called the Knitting Poem. Under the fence, catch the sheep, back we come, over we leap. If that helps anybody, it's kind of cute. So, under the fence, catch the sheep, back we go, over we leap. And again, you don't want it too tight that you can't do this. You want it, but you don't want it super loose, because then you're going to have a hard, well, then it'll be kind of lacy looking, and also you'll have a hard time with sizing, because sizing is kind of set up for a standard tension. So through the, around the back, catch it, and off it goes. Under the fence, catch the sheep, back we come with your next stitch, over we leap.
I can certainly tell that you've done this before.
I know, I'm trying to slow it down. The biggest, and you know, when I do the knitting classes at the Resilience Festival, I think the most difficulty people have is just feeling comfortable with 2 needles and wool. You're doing 3 things with 2 hands, and it's just like anything. The longer you do it, the more accustomed you get to it. And needles feel really good in your hands. So through the front to the back, wrap around the back, make that loop. You just kind of lever it off. And there you go. Same thing again, through the front to the back, wrap it around, pull that loop through, and voila, we've got our first row of knitting done. And then all you do, so that's your right-handed needle. All you do is take that needle in your left hand and you reverse it, and you've got your wool coming off here again, and you just start over again. So under the fence, catch the sheep, back we come, and off we leap. So through front to back, wrap it around, grab that piece of wool to make your loop, and then you slide it right off. Uh-oh, it's Jill's turn now. So that's the, what did I say? That's the garter stitch. There's great classes when we're out of COVID at All Strung Out downtown. If anybody's from Fergus or near Fergus, there's a brand new knitting shop there. I can't remember the name. It's right on Main Street. And she's going to have classes. She's actually told me she's going to start them up again soon. There's great knitting tutorials online, and you just go into a good wool shop like All Strung Out downtown, and if you buy your wool there, and if you have any issues or problems or questions, they're so happy to help out. And you probably know other knitters in your life that'll really want to help you out too. And I'm happy. I've got my little cheat sheet here, and I'm happy to send it off to anybody if you want to. I think Forrest has your email addresses.
Yes.
Or you can email me directly, GM Bartlett, BARTLETT jill26@gmail.com, or
So
contact info at Transition Guelph, and then we'll send it out through that as well. So thanks everybody for joining the class.
Thank you very much, Gail.
I'm going to switch my camera now so that you can see me and I can watch Jill.
Yes.
There.
So Jill, I'm going to make us a co-host. Yes. And so our next exciting workshop is how to darn a sock, the darn sock. And to do that, we have Jill. Now Jill, it actually was interesting. She was a former instructor of theatrical costumes in the drama department of the University of Guelph. And more recently, she's been spending several hours weekly mending clothes at Chalmers Community Services Centre when we weren't in lockdown, and the Repair Cafe as well. So I actually cheated and looked up on YouTube to see how to darn a sock, to see what I was up for. And it sounded difficult, but it looked easier than what you did, Gail, I think. So Jill, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, hi, my name's Jill, as Forrest said. I'm here to talk to you about darning, and now that Gail's got everybody just really excited about knitting, I'm here to say that after a little bit of practice, you'll be able to knit your I'm going to show you is after you've worn those wonderful socks for ages and they start to wear and maybe even get a hole in it, I'll be able to show you how to mend that so that you get plenty more life out of your socks. And I mean, it's getting more and more common that people are knitting and making woolen socks or gifting them or whatever, and know that it takes a lot of hours to do that. If you get around to making socks yourself, you'll know what I'm talking about, and it's worth mending them to make them last a little bit longer. So while Gail was talking, I realized, well, I should probably show you one of my most recent projects. I'm just knitting a pair of socks for my grandson. This is the first one. He wanted colors of the Toronto maple leaf. So this is one sock that I've just finished and I have to sew up the bottom. This is one of the early socks that I made for him. So about 6 years ago. So you can tell he's grown quite a bit. Okay, I'm going to switch cameras so that you can get a close-up of what I've
got a good setup.
Well,
like this is a camera pointing down on stuff. So.
Okay, let's get this moved. Okay, so on the tray here, I've gathered basically the things that we'll need. First of all, a holey sock, and that's spelt with an E in it. It doesn't have anything to do with religion. But this is a sock that has a hole in it. And actually, I've also got a little glove here, a knitted glove that has a hole in it. And basically the technique I'm going to show you, you can use on any knitted garment. So socks, gloves, mittens, t-shirts even. If you've got a favorite t-shirt you want to save, sweaters, scarves, anything that's knitted. The first thing you do before you start is to stuff something into the sock. And I've used a plastic ball or rubber ball here. You could use a tennis ball. Veteran darners use something called a darning egg or another slightly different shaped tool called a darning mushroom. So this has got a handle this way and you can see that it's kind of mushroom shaped, but don't worry, if you don't have either of those, you can easily get by with a ball. So a tennis ball is pretty easily available. I got these plastic balls from the dollar store, so they work fine too. The problem with the tennis ball is it's got all this fuzzy stuff on top, and I've had people in workshops before that ended up darning their sock to the tennis ball. We managed to get them separated, but it was a bit of tension there for a minute. Okay, so that's the starters. Next, you'll need some kind of material to darn with. And usually what I recommend is choosing a piece of wool, or if it's a cotton sock, you can use embroidery thread that comes in a skein like this. At Lens Mill or Fabricland, you can get hanks of, pardon me, darning wool that are lots of different colors, as you can see.
Oh, Jill, I accidentally muted you.
I'm not sure where I was. You can get various different weights of wool, and I would recommend when you're darning to use a weight of wool or thread as close to the weight of your sock as possible. Remember that the hole you're mending is something that you're going to be walking on eventually. So you want to make sure that it's the wool that you're mending with is not super thick to make a big bump. So, so I've got some wools here. Now, darning needles, okay, you may be or may not be able to tell. The darning needle has an eye that's a lot larger than a regular sewing needle that would only take a small thread. But in order to get the wool or several thicknesses of thread through, you need to have a large eye. In order to thread the needle, and I'm just going to demonstrate that for you now using a piece of wool, usually what I do is take the wool and fold it over top of the needle, then using my thumb and forefinger, pinch them together as tightly as I can, and then move the length of the needle down to the point, which leaves a tiny little loop there that I'm going to carefully manipulate so that I can get it through the eye of the needle. Can everybody see how I do that? That's the easiest way. No, not the easiest. That's probably the most accessible way of threading wool through a needle. The easiest way, and this is almost like a cheat, but it's way fun. In a packet of assorted needles that you might buy, often they include this little thing that's called a needle threader. And it's a piece of metal with a wire diamond shape on the end. And the cheat is that you put that wire through the eye of the needle. I don't know if you can see that, hopefully you can. Then all you have to do is take the end of your wool. I'm using my left hand, which is not what I normally do, but you feed it through the diamond shape. And then all you have to do is pull on that and we'll thread the needle for you. Like I said, that's like a cheat, but it's definitely a fun way to do it. The other things that I've got here that you'll need too is a pair of scissors or thread snips, or maybe a seam ripper to cut your wool when you're finished. I've also got a little thing here, which is a rubber mat that I think was designed to open bottles if you can't get a good grip on it. The usefulness of this is that sometimes when you're darning a sock, you might go through a really thick bit and it's difficult to pull the needle. So if you grab it with this piece of rubber, you can pull on it with a little bit more purchase. Okay, I think those are about all the things I need to show you initially. I'm gonna swap trays and start the demo. Are you ready? Okay, my first example here is a sock over a ball, and I've tried to use as many contrasting colors as I can so everybody can see properly. So as I said, I usually recommend that you use wool or thread as close to the sock color as possible. But, and that will mean that your stitching or what was a hole won't show very much. But if you're bold, or if you want to draw attention to it, you can use a contrasting color, any color that you want to, which is kind of fun too. Okay, first thing you're going to do around this hole, about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of the hole, I'm going to do what's called a running stitch. And I'm going to do that all the way around to isolate the hole. So it shows me where I'm going to be stitching to and from, but it also makes it so that the hole, while I'm working on it, is not going to get any bigger. So I'm going to start, for me, at the bottom right hand thing. For you, I'm not sure where that is in orientation, but I'm starting at the bottom right for me of the hole. I'm not going to use the tiniest stitches ever made, but you can see that I'm just doing what's called a running stitch around the outside. Pardon me. Okay, the next thing I want to tell you is you do not, oh, excuse me. You do not put a knot in your thread. So normally if you're stitching by hand, you will knot your thread so that it doesn't immediately pull out of the fabric. However, when you're darning, it's really important that you have no knot there. So when I first pulled the thread through, you can see that I've left about 1 inch at the end. We're going to be weaving the threads in and out in a basket fashion that will be quite tightly oriented, and you won't have to worry about that thread pulling out. If you put a knot in it, what will happen is that you'll end up stepping on it at some point and it'll be really uncomfortable. So no knots in any of this. Okay, so I've done a few stitches. I'm just going to carry on. You don't have to do all the stitches before you pull your thread out. However many feels comfortable for you. You can just do those stitches and then pull the thread so that it's tight and lying flat, but you don't want to pull it so tight that it makes everything pucker up. So you want to keep things as smooth as possible, around 1/8 of an inch away from the hole. So I'm just going to finish off doing that till I get around to where I started. I'll give you a couple of minutes to catch up. I also had a quick drink of water there because my throat's all scratchy. Anyway, all right, the very next step that I'm going to do, I'm going to start making some parallel lines with the thread all the way along here, which eventually I will come back in a perpendicular direction to do, as I said, a basket weave. Incidentally, I also have a full page of instruction that I'm not sure if Forrest is able to put a link in the chat. And if not, if you go to info@Transition Guelph, you'll be able to get those instructions. Okay, my next step is fairly close to the first line of stitching. I'm going to start doing some running stitches that will end up being parallel and covering the hole. And notice that I start my rows of stitching still in the sock. And the reason why we're always stitching some into the sock is to give this all stability. You wouldn't be able to actually work on the hole itself. You have to have the base of the sock to knit into. So I've gone up and made one parallel line. I'm going to bring my needle down next to it. You can turn the sock or however feels most comfortable for your hand to be stitching. I'm going to be careful in my second row that where I had the needle going over the sock to begin with, the second row, I'm going to have the needle going under the fabric so that it kind of goes in brick fashion. So one row, the thread will be and needle will go over. The next row, it will go under. So side by side, they'll be different. And this is starting the basis for you to be able to do the basket weaving. So I've now got 2 rows. I'm going to come down again. I'm getting closer to the hole. Haven't quite gotten there yet. But my 3rd row now is almost at the edge of the hole. I'm going to keep flattening it down. And remember that whenever you pull your thread, you don't want to pull it so tight that everything puckers up. That'll feel so uncomfortable on your foot, trust me. I want you to try and avoid that. Okay, so I've now got 3 rows. This next row is the first time the thread is actually going to partly be going over the hole. So I'm still doing brick fashion. And when I get to the edge of the hole here, can you see that the needle is starting to pass over that yellow bit, which is actually where the hole is. And on this particular row, the needle is on top as I'm coming to the hole. So I'm going to go over to the next side, and right next to this stitch that I did in the previous row, I need to go under. So just keep that in mind from row to row, and you'll make things a whole lot easier for yourself as you start weaving. So I've got my first line that actually covers part of the hole. So coming back to the next one, remember when I got to over to this side of the hole, my thread was going under. This one, it's going to go over, and then on the other side of the hole, it's going to come up under. This is definitely an exercise in patience. I probably should have warned you about that at the beginning, but it's a time to just kind of relax and take things slow. So my next row, I'm coming back again. When I get towards the hole here, as it happens, my needle will be going over here and under here. Okay, so hopefully we've got folks who are actually darning something of their own while I'm showing you. I'm going to skip over to my next example. So this one, hopefully you can see enough of a contrast here of lime green and this gray sock. I've already stitched around the outside. On this sock, I might tell you that the hole itself is fairly small, but there was quite an area here that was worn, and that often happens on socks, that it doesn't necessarily wear evenly everywhere. And I thought, well, if I'm going to take the time to darn that hole, I might as well reinforce the part that's worn at the same time. It'll take you a little bit longer than it would have just to do the hole, but it makes sense while you're putting the effort in. So I've done the first step of stitching around the outside, and you can see that it's not actually a circle, it's kind of irregular. Then I did a series of lines of stitching here. This is all over that worn spot that I told you about until we get to the hole right here. So I've got a series of parallel lines, and these, where you can see the most green, are the parts that actually go over the hole. Okay, so my next step is to come back along the edge here, and I'm going to start stitching, or start weaving actually, in the opposite direction to make like a basket weave. So when I begin, and again, this piece of thread or wool that I'm using has no knot in the end. And I actually, to do all of this work, I ended up using 2 lengths of yarn. So neither of the pieces had knots in them. You never want to knot it. Okay, I'm going to start from the one corner here, and I'm going to be stitching over and under in basket weave. And this may take a few more seconds to do than what the first line of stitching took. Stitch a few and pull it through, however many feels most comfortable. And again, if you get to a point where it feels really difficult to pull the needle out, if you've got a little piece of like rubber cloth or a purpose-built thing they do actually make needle pullers that are even smaller than this, but you don't need to go to the trouble of getting that. If you hold onto the needle with the piece of rubber, you can pull it quite easily.
Gail, or Jill, we had a question.
Yes, please ask.
My thread gets too short in the middle of the basket weave.
Good question. Okay, so if you get partway through and there's not enough yarn, first of all, what I would recommend, thank you for bringing that question up, actually, it's really important. What I would recommend is that you try to begin and end your pieces of wool around the outside. So if you see that just before you're going to start a row, it's going to be too short, pull it out of the needle, thread up again, and start a new one on the outside, because eventually you're going to be cutting that off. If you've actually already stitched it, I wouldn't worry about it. Just pull the needle out wherever you are, and then with a new piece of wool, start at that same place that you started that row and continue on. And as I said, it will be all woven in tightly enough that you won't have to worry about that coming out. Okay, so I'm going to pick up here where I was. I'm going over and under as carefully as I can. You may only be able to do 2 or 3 stitches. That's perfectly fine. Now, when I get over to this edge of the row, again, I'm going to turn my ball around till I'm now going to be stitching in the opposite direction. And you need to be quite intentional about this. You're going to place your threads over and under opposite to where they were the row before. So this may take a minute to actually be able to do it. And you can use your other finger as a kind of a cushion to push against if you need to. And thanks, Forrest, for checking about that question. If anybody has any questions they want to ask, please do. Because this is basically all the technique you need to know. Carry on doing this. I'm aware of time, so I'm just gonna, okay, I'm gonna skip to my next one. This one, you can see that I've got stitches going in both directions, and I did this purposely, but it might happen that you find after you've done your darning in both directions, you find that there's a space that's kind of leaves a bit of a hole. That's easy enough to go back and put a couple of rows of stitching in place. So again, I'm going to be going over and under my stitching, and I'll just add another row in here. When you're going over the actual hole, you need to be careful again to stitch over and under and pull that through. So I've now added an extra whole line of thread in there, which is further going to fill in the hole. And then I'll come back from the other direction. And again, go over and under in the opposite direction from the row before. Like so. So after I thought that I'd finished all of this, I realized that there was still a bit of a gap there, and I can easily go back and weave some more threads in. That's not a problem. So
we have one more question.
Yep, ask away.
what if we're darning a fabric which is very elastic, lots of stretch in it? How much do you tension the fabric?
Okay, that's a good question. And most of the time, the things that you're going to be darning are from knitted fabrics, mostly. And intrinsic in the knitting process means that it's going to have some stretch. And that's how, you know, like a sock that starts out like this can stretch to fit your foot that's more like this. So I wouldn't pull the thread as tightly as you can. You want to leave a little bit of give in the amount of stitches, but again, you don't want a huge loop. So it's kind of a fairly delicate balance, but that's a good question, because if you pull it too tight, you're going to start to get puckering, which you don't want to do. So I have seen instructions say to leave a little bit of a loop at the end of each row, which allows for expansion of a foot. I've never had an issue with pulling it taut, but that's definitely something to think about. Is there another question here? Okay, about starting from inside or outside. Another good question. And there's always more than one way to attack any of these things. So I usually darn from the outside, although the instructions that I wrote tells you to turn the sock inside out. And I've seen recommendations for both of those things. So it's basically entirely up to you. If you stitch from the inside, you'll probably only see the small amount of stitching it right over the hole that you've done. Whereas if you start from the outside, you're going to see a wider ring of stitching. It's entirely up to you. My sense is that if you stitch from the outside, where your foot is on the inside, you're going to have less kind of bumpiness, but really it's a personal preference. So I've started from the outside. You could stitch from the inside. And thanks for that question. That's good to clarify that. There's always more than one way to do something, I found. Okay, I missed the good idea that was sent. So let's have a look and see if I can do it. Try doing shapes. Oh yes, okay. Yeah, that is a great idea to do shapes as well. Like I said, if you use thread that's contrasting to what you're working on, you're going to draw attention to it, and people will be complimenting on your wonderful bit of stitching. So, and if they have something negative to say, just tell them they shouldn't be so close to you to be able to see those mistakes or whatever. Well, I'm aware of the time.
Well, we have a bit of extra time, Gail, or Jill.
Oh, we do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so so I have basically on this one, I've pretty much finished the amount of stitching that I'm going to do. So what I'll do with the time that's left over is show you what to do with all these bits hanging out, because you definitely don't want to have your sock like that. So what you do is for each one of these pieces that hangs out, which is where a knot would normally be if you were doing hand stitching, you want to cut the thread as close to your sock as possible without cutting your sock. Very important, or you'll make more work for yourself. You have to repair that hole. So just hold it up and with the scissors, cut it off as close as you can to the sock, all the little bits. And if there's a smidge of yarn sticking out, you might be able to see even a tiny little, with wear, that's going to work itself back into the sock, and it won't be an issue. But the fact that we've done so much weaving of the yarn as we were doing the darning, you won't have to worry about anything pulling out and undermining all the stitching that you spent time doing. So you know what I'd like to do now? I'm going to switch cameras, and I'd love for folks to hold up the darning that they've been doing while they've been watching me. Don't be shy. Okay, well, I'm going to put it on gallery view, so hopefully I can see everyone. Anybody? Whoa, Carolyn, awesome. Nice. Oh, Becky, you've been knitting and, well.
Yes, no darning here.
All right. Okay, looking good, Kate. Oh, all right, nice. Monica, I like those socks. Woohoo, flashy. All right, looking great. Catherine, yeah, thank you. Anybody got any other questions while we're still here?
I've actually been recording this, so there will be a recording posted to the Transition Guelph website in due course.
Yeah, and sorry about the sneeze in the middle. What can you do, right?
Yeah.
Okay, my instruction sheet will be available for anyone who'd like it.
Yeah, so just email info@transitionguelph.org and we'll send it back to you.
Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.
Thanks, Jill.